all media, not just online, is roughly balanced between national and local, roughly 50 and 50. However, right now, online, circa the end of 2005, local was only about 26%, 77% national. But what we're seeing is more and more local advertisers are starting to go online, which is kind of a trend that's been true in all media. When TV came out initially, it was initially the national advertisers used it for the first 5, 10 years, and then the local advertisers started to realize they could advertise too. So the local stuff seems to be driving these fantastic growth rates right now. It's a great picture for online. And so this all seems good. We'd like it to grow this way forever. And there's a lot of people in the industry, and the trade industry in particular, the NAA and others, who are thinking, this is great. Look at how it's growing. If it goes this way forever, we're going to be fine. Like I saw in that same reaction story to the NAA piece, somebody interviewed John Morton, the newspaper analyst, and he said, well, this keeps up in classified, online classified revenues another 10 years. It will equal where it is in print right now, so newspapers will be fine for classified. The problem with this is you've got to look beneath the surface a little bit. Because there are some caveats here. And when people start talking about this type of growth forever, you obviously got to get a little worried and worry what's in the water here. Because there are some fundamental differences between the business models of traditional and online. Yeah, we're selling space in print or on TV commercials, and we're selling space, quote, online, but there are some fundamentals here. And these fundamentals are some of the things that keep revenues lower right now for online and print. Because after all, we've been doing this for 10 years now, almost, or maybe 97 when the first banner ads came out, a fair amount of time. But we're only making about 3% of what print is doing right now, despite the fact they have fantastic audiences. A couple of changes here. Professor Picard had mentioned one is choice. In Austin, 20 years ago, you probably had one newspaper that you could get home delivered, The Statesman, and you had access to maybe 3 TV channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS. This has changed. The amount of choice consumers have gotten over the last 10, 15 years has been fantastic. And if you do kind of the supply and demand equation on that, they've got more supply, which has kind of lessened the value of your use. To a large degree, this is perception that people can get national news anywhere now means that they're no longer necessarily willing to pay for it online in this new medium. Again, go fairly quickly here in the interest of time, but that's one of the reasons that people aren't willing to pay what they used to pay in traditional media. Like, if you want it print, yeah, you've got to pay this much. But online, there's so many other sources that people aren't willing to pay. Plus, there's also a kind of fragmentation going on here, because if in the old days you had one newspaper, you wanted news, to read news in text, you'd go to the Statesman for international, national, financial, and sports, every purpose. But online, forgive me, again, I don't mean to pick on any one paper, but I'll just pick on Austin because I'm here. A lot of people aren't going to go to the Statesman's website for international news. They're probably going to go to the Times, or CNN, or the BBC. They're not going to necessarily go to the Statesman's homepage for all their financial news. Not when they can go to the Journal homepage or some other thing. Or for sports, they're going to go to ESPN. So they're not willing to pay the same amount for the package. The package is fragmented. And again, value has gone down on this. Nowadays, they've got the cornucopia of news. They can get this stuff from all sorts of sources. And again, as I just said, that fragmented. So you've got a supply and demand equation here. People aren't willing to pay. And the key to this is they're not willing to pay the circulation revenue, as Gary had mentioned. Gary, I think you said that the publishers are less willing to charge. I disagree. They'd love to charge. It's the consumers who aren't willing to pay right now. Because the Journal can get away with it because they're a business paper to a large degree. They're not necessarily a general interest newspaper, but out of 1,500 newspapers in the U.S., I'm tracking right now 40 that charge anything. And only one of those is above 50,000 circulation, and not by much. So there's not many that can do it. The other one is frequency and usage. And this has a great effect on how much money we make. There are 54, actually it's a little old, it's about 51 million print readers per day in the U.S. That's the circulation weekday. The average reader reads it about 5 to 6 days a week. I think it's 78% of the time. So they're using it about 28 times monthly. And during a month, they might read, if the average paper is 20 pages, 460 pages a month they'll actually be exposed to. And if you look at the figures from the Readership Institute at Northwestern and other places, they're spending about 28 minutes, 30 minutes a day, so that equals about 10 hours a month in usage. I'm putting the figures in monthly terms here because in the online world, we use monthly figures. So keep these in mind when you compare the online newspapers, websites. Actually, I just realized I've got European papers there, and I'm using U.S. figures, but that's good. For those of you in Texas who've never been abroad, they do have newspapers there. And actually, second forgiveness, this is an old slide from a New York Times website. It's not the new design. It's actually a 6-year-old slide. But the figures are current. You've got about 52 million people using newspaper websites in the U.S. right now. However, the average person only comes in about 6 to 8 times per month. I'm using figures from Nielsen here from about September, sees a total of about 29 web pages all month long. That's all. And spends about 28 minutes all month long going to those newspaper sites. In other words, they're using it the same amount of time in a month that a print user uses it daily, which is a problem if you're charging per exposure, because you've got much less exposures here, which I'll get to in a minute. So the frequency is much less. The usage is much less. The numbers are the same, roughly, in terms of usership, but it's a much less well-used product. And oddly enough, I hate to throw cold water on stuff, 10 years into web publishing, news sites are seen by fewer people much less often and much less thoroughly than the declining print products. That's not necessarily a good situation to be in. Another one is that when an advertiser takes an ad out in a print paper, he pays for the entire press run, not the number of people who actually see the ad. And if traffic increases in a newspaper, in other words, if there's more circulation, the publisher can generally charge more for an ad. These are kind of important concepts for the difference between revenue online and print, because in the web, you're not charging for scarcity of scarce ad space. If you get more traffic, it basically means you've got more ad inventory. You've got to find banner ads, buyers of banner ads for. In print, well, let me explain it this way, I think. If you've got a print edition of, say, 50 pages, of which about 20 pages of that is advertising, and here in the U.S. it actually be about 30 pages, and miraculously the circulation of that newspaper doubled, the publisher wouldn't necessarily have to print 100 pages the next day. He'd probably print a few more because he could probably afford it, but what instead he would do, rather than doubling the number of pages he's going to print, is he would double the amount he'd charge for that page of ad space, because he's got twice the demand. However, look at the equivalent in the web. If you've got a web edition, which gets 5 million page views a day or a month, and each page has a banner ad on it, so you've got 5 million banner ads you have to sell each month. If the next month you all of a sudden get 10 million, in other words, your traffic at that site is doubled, can you double your ad rate? Because you got double the traffic? No, all of a sudden you've now got to sell 5 million more ads. You've got to find buyers for 5 million more ads. And the effect of this difference of selling scarce space in print and the surplus space online is it tends to depress the CPM, the rate per thousand that you can charge on this. My little brother and I publish a 10,000 circulation daily in Connecticut. It's been in our family for 5 generations. I hope it will be there for 6. Hope it survives. We charge about $1,500 for a full-page ad. That's actually about 9,000 circulation daily. The New York Times, which is 1,000 times our size, will charge, I don't know what the rate is running, 100 to 125,000 per page, open rate right now. So ad rate is roughly proportional in print to the size of the circulation. However, if you go to my newspaper's web page, look for the ad rates, or go to the Times page, look for the ad rates, you'll find that we're each selling banner ads for about $15 to $50, generally $15 to $20 if we can get it, per thousand, because of this effect. The more traffic you got on the site, the more ads you have to sell. There's some amelioration of this in terms of inventory and other things, but that's basically how the function works. So the problem is that it's different. The more traffic you've got, you can't raise your rates. You've got to just sell more ads. And that depresses the amount of CPM you can charge for this. So unlike traditional media, increased traffic doesn't lead to higher ad rates, which is a problem for us online right now. And as I mentioned before, an advertiser in print will pay for the entire press run, no matter if anybody, not the actual number of people who see the page which there's ads on. Whereas online, you bill the advertiser only for the actual number of ads exposed. So if your user is only coming in 6 times a month, as I mentioned, compared to print, where you're charging the advertiser every day, even if it just piles up on the reader's porch, you've got a revenue problem. And the result of all this, I think that's the longest, most type-laden slide I've done in years, is that you get much less revenue in print than online. 10 years into this, that's why we've only got 5%, even though we've got huge audience numbers. At Borrell, we took a look at 250 U.S. websites and got either their public statements about the revenue from the online operation, or actually confidentially through non-disclosure agreements got the actual figures they were getting, and we cranked them out to figure out how much they're making per year per user. And here's the range in various circulation categories. This is 2004. We're about to release a newer version of this. And it ranged from about $6 to $36 per year per user of a newspaper website. Per year, remember. Maybe that sounds pretty good, but if you actually compare that to print, those are the figures in print. Because if you take a printed newspaper and you take the circulation revenue, I forget what the Statesman Review charges per year for subscription. I'm a subscriber to the Times. I know I'm paying $620 a year for that. And you add to that how much each user is worth to your advertising. Simply take the ad revenues divided by circulation. Put the numbers together. The average newspaper in the U.S. is earning about $500 to $900 annually per print user. So you can see there's a huge gap here in terms of how much newspapers are earning per print user versus per online user. In fact, the figure is about, depending, anywhere from about 20 to 100 times the difference per user. In other words, as a printed newspaper loses a subscriber in print, well, you hear a lot of publishers right now talk about, well, yeah, look at our print numbers are going down, but, you know, look at how many people our website is getting, as if they're equivalent. Well, unfortunately, and I wish it was otherwise, they aren't equivalent. There's like a huge difference between them. For every print reader you lose right now to a newspaper, you've got to make that up by anywhere from 20 to 100 web readers because of this difference in revenue. That's a big problem, particularly as the print side starts to go down. And the same is true to a degree. We have similar figures for TV, and forgive me, I'm going to use newspapers rather than have to say magazines versus TV, that a little bit. So again, we've got to greatly increase these revenues, or we're in big trouble, as Professor Picard has mentioned, sometime in the near future in our lifetimes. And to a degree, this shouldn't be surprising, because if new media and new technologies create more efficient markets, it would kind of make sense that online advertising means that the revenue you're going to get is going to be lower because it's reducing the middleman, reducing friction in the market on it. So it shouldn't be surprising there's this difference. Theoretically, it would make sense. There's some logic behind it. Unfortunately, we're the middlemen being cut out. And I don't know if you can see that and whether you know who these guys are, but this is the Bunker brothers. Cheng and Eng. They were born in 1848 in the country we now call Thailand, which used to be known as Siam. And these are the original Siamese twins, hired by Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus as a freak show and attraction. They toured the world for about 60 years and retired to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and became farmers, oddly enough. But to a degree, to my mind, this is an illustration of online and traditional media